Hello! Welcome to the first episode of Scarlet Betch Comic Workshop.
Work, hey.
Yeah. I'm Anthony.
And I'm Jason.
Awesome. So this is the first episode, and what we're thinking of for a format for these guys is that we're gonna go through the chapter, talk about it between the two of us.
Anthony, what are you talking about? How do we...
I'm glad you asked, Jason. I'm talking about drawing words and writing pictures.
Hooray! If this was a Lady Gaga video, we would have been paid a lot of money for this.
Right? I expect to see the dough. You can check out their website at dw-wp.com for examples and things. You're doing this book at home. Yeah, so our workshop is we're going to be working through the 15 lessons of drawing words and writing pictures. And we're going to be sharing our journey with you. And hopefully you'll share it back with us.
Yeah, if you're interested in sending us your work, you can email us at scarletbetch@gmail.com. That's SCARLETBETCH. Or you can tweet us or whatever you like.
Exactly.
Just not snail mail because I won't get to us fast enough.
So back to the format. We're just going to be working. We'll talk about the chapter, and then we'll talk about the work that we do, and we'll talk about the critique that we have of each other's work, and hopefully we can illustrate some positive and negative ways of making comics. Yeah, and you can learn.
Okay. So the first chapter was called. It's helpful because there's so much. I don't think what a lot of people don't realize about comic books is that there are so many elements and components, and with each element and component is a separate choice. You know, am I gonna have panel border? You know, am I gonna have panel borders? Am I gonna have like captions? Am I gonna have text? Am I gonna have there's all these different every single thing is a choice you make.
Exactly.
And my big problem is that I can be somewhat lazy sometimes, and there will be a lot of times where I'll have a certain scene in my head, and I'll have it it'll be very movie kind of in my brain, and then but by the time I start penciling it out, storyboarding, and I'm like, this is too many panels. I don't want to draw this. What if I condense all these panels to one thing? I'll go from there. And so I try to do all these crazy ways of fitting all this stuff into one panel when it really should just you should let it breathe and let it kind of be as it is,
Exactly. My thing is I don't really have as much of an art background as much as I have a writing background in terms of storytelling, and so when I go and write my comics, I will get lazy and fatigued, and I'll go, I bet this panel is just a big speech bubble with very little action. That's a good story, definitely. But that's one of the things I liked about building blocks. This chapter, there's no work. Because the building blocks of a comic is not the word.
Yeah, although I think I cheated. I think I used some text in mine for sound effects and shit.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I don't know if is that cheating? Are there rules? Guidelines? It's a choice, right? We talk about there's so many choices in a comic book. Are you gonna use words for your sound effects? Or are you just gonna use sweat drops? Are you gonna write out your curse words? Are you gonna make them ampersands?
But my favorite word from this chapter was emanata.
Such
Which
a
is
good word.
yeah, which I never knew before, but evidently in emanata, they're just the random lines you draw on the page to indicate an emotion of a character, the I guess in Japanese kind of stuff like the big sweat drop, that is an emanata, and I didn't realize how helpful they are, and it's just there are a lot of emotions that are just really difficult to convey just with the facial features, granted, like the Emeralds are kind of more a cartoony kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they still exist in kind of like mainstream serious comics, but they're more understated. You know, you'll like instead of like big sweat drops, you might get this happens in anime a lot. You'll get a lot of speed lines, like to show someone's astonished or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, ships and background, definitely. I would say Aminata. You know, I mean, because in anime and manga, when you get the romantic feelings, there's suddenly a shift, and they're in a very verdant garden filled with flowers. And I'd say that's Aminata. The thing that it was interesting because Aminata originated in part not just for swept drops and like angry clouds above people's heads, but for the symbols that were used instead of curse words. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. It's like a graphical representation of something that is not visible.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a really cool word. I think that was my favorite little aside in this chapter. The big question, right, is what are comics? What is sequential art? They had 3 definitions at the beginning of this. I mean, sequential art being the first one, art in sequence, to tell a story. And then Scott McCloud's images juxtaposed in deliberate sequence in order to convey an idea and/or an aesthetic response. And then they had the 4 prerequisites of comic strips, which were:
there must be sequence of separate images, there must be a preponderance of image over text, the medium in which the strip appears and for which it is originally intended must be reproductive, that is in printed form, a mass medium, and the sequence must tell a story that is both moral and topical.
Right.
I don't agree with everything in that statement. I more kind of closely cleave to the sequential art. I don't think comics necessarily need to be mass-produced to be a comic, you know?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and does a comic need to be intended for mass consumption? I mean...
And there's also plenty of comics that are not even sequential, you know? Like half, a good bunch of, like Family Circus or like Non Sequitur, they're just like single panel, like image and caption, that's what they are, so they're not sequential.
Family Circus does have really sequential one panel sometimes when they have Billy's running around line.
Yeah.
So the comedy of that strip is all about where he's run and the sequence of events and what he's left in his wake. And so, strips like that do use sequence at times, but I think you're right, at times it's just Dolly talking to her mom, and it's one moment in time. Yeah. So even sequential art is not a complete definition. Moral and topical. I mean, to a certain extent, every piece of human communication should be moral and topical, because it's on a topic. I wanted to see what works he said, oh, that's not comics, because it is neither moral nor topical. Like, what did he write off? I mean, Patrick Fillian's moral and topical. The topic is just not something we discuss in polite society.
Religion.
For what?
Religion.
Oh, for religion. Oh, yeah. Awesome. And then there was a whole bunch of terms. Those are pretty good, but I don't know if I really had something to say about them.
No. I think the thing that I liked most about it was there's a section for people who can't draw, and it was really great because it gave a lot of examples of comic strips that are successful, comic artists who really can't draw for shit, but are able to, there's a comic artist, Shane Simmons, who, like, the strip is just dots. And dots in different arrangements. And so, like, I mean, I imagine that one is limited in, in terms of, like, the kinds of things that we're going to do with dots. Exactly. But if you like something like XKCD, for example, which is, like, super successful, super well-loved, and, like, and one of the few kind of like web comic artists out there who can like support himself on his work.
And that's the interesting thing. If you look at the beginnings of that strip, there are some very nicely drawn panels. So it's not that he like has no artistic competency, right? It's not that he can't put an image down on paper, but it's a tool. And I think I also wanted to mention Quants.com as another example of that. Yeah. No, but I think that's one of I love that. You know, whenever someone's like, I say, do you want to come do 24-hour comics at my house? And they're like, I can't draw. I'm like, well, neither can I. It doesn't matter. Just draw some stuff.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've been on this long odyssey to like improve my drawing skills, and I think I've improved a lot over the past. In earnest, I began to draw really regularly, almost every day, with an eye to improve over the past year and a half or so. And I think I have improved a lot. But
you're real good.
What?
You're real good.
Oh, I mean, I still have a long way to go, and I'm sure real artists or real art students who are in real programs that are not being self-taught would scoff at the stuff that I do. But I think that what's really helpful to remind myself that is that like not everything needs to be like polished, you know? Like I remember there's a comic, a web comic called The Less Than Epic Adventures of TJ and Amal. And granted, that the artist for the webcomic is really good and her stuff is beautiful. But what I really took from it is that like how kind of like unfinished it was, and how not really unfinished, but like it's very sketchy, and it's not the traditional like line art, you know, colors, text bubbles. You know, it's very, she embraces the inadequacies of her style and makes it a choice, you know. And I think as long as you're really intentional about what you do, like it's valuable, or it's like, you know, it's valid.
And that comic is, it's beautiful. And yeah, I love that you pointed out that it's not polished at all. It's just perfect. Speaking of unpolished, you want to take a look at our work?
Okay.
Do it.